Hey listeners, have you ever had patients give you an earful for using plastic pill bottles? Introducing Parcel Health's Fill Box. The Fill Box is fully biodegradable, water-resistant, and user-friendly eco-packaging for pharmacies. As pharmacists, we know containers aren't just containers. They're protectors of meds and displayers of med info. But they also are your pharmacy's daily mini billboard in a patient's home in their hands. So check out the Fill Box, see how it can fulfill your sustainability and marketing goals. Visit parcelhealth.co today and enter the keyword BizPharm with a Z for 10% off your order. Welcome to the Business of Pharmacy podcast, where we explore the business of pharmacy through candid, in-depth conversations with the industry's top leaders. Every Monday, tune in for insights and stories you won't find anywhere else. I'm your host, Mike Kelzer. Anaïs and Kristin, for those that haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
My name is Dr. Anaïs Webster and Mennuti, and I am a pharmacist. I work for a hospital system out in Oregon, and I am the producer as well as the co-director of this documentary called Harmacy. You may have known it as Would You Like Shots with that, but we have had an exciting pivot, and we are now Harmacy.
My name is Dr. Kristen Speer. I am a pharmacist. I am one of the producers on Harmacy, this documentary film, as well as a co-founder and board director of the Psychedelic Pharmacist Association.
Anaïs, the last time you and I talked, this was, would you like shots with that? And now we're calling the documentary Harmacy. I think it's a cool move. Were you getting pushback on confusion, or was it too long, or people weren't picking up the reference? Why the change?
One of the things we've been able to do is partner with a Hollywood consulting producer. His name is Scott DuPont, and he has put us in contact with other folks from Hollywood. And one of those people, his name is Rick Pamplin. So Rick and the team, we all met, and Rick was like, very first thing he said was change the title. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? The title's so great. And then it's hard. And I was like, wow, I really like the title. But then I listened and I completely saw where he was coming from, because it is long. It's too long. One. Number two, if you're a general audience scrolling through your TV, is this about liquor? Is this about pharmacy? What is this about? We did a lot of brainstorming and just kind of putting about 100 potential titles in a document, just throwing things out there. And then we each looked at it, and Harmacy is the one that kind of bubbled to the surface, because it seemed like this is encompassing what we are talking about, the broader scope of the issues. Because when we first came on, it was mostly a workers' rights, labor rights documentary. We were talking about the working conditions in chain retail pharmacy. Mm-hmm. But as we've interviewed folks over the last several months and we've had these conversations with people, we realize how deep a lot of the issues in pharmacy go, and how some of the issues, if not addressed, do create a sort of pharmacy environment rather than that patient care environment that we are looking for. And so we think it's just a broader title with more general audience appeal, and that's short and punchy.
I love the name, but I've got to have our listeners make a pledge that we're not going to go down the road of hair salons in naming our pharmacies. You know what I'm talking about. Hair today, gone tomorrow, or cut above the rest. You've seen them all, unless it's just a Michigan thing. So pharmacies can't go down that road, but I like it. Harmacy. That's a real catchy name. All right. So what I want to find out, ladies, is what group of people have been the biggest pain in the ass as you're marching down this path of getting this documentary done? Is it businesses? Is it associations? Is it a group of people? Is it dealing with the Hollywood types? What people are actually being a pain in the ass through this endeavor?
I'm thinking about what I want to say because, truthfully, there hasn't been a lot, although I expect there could and will be very soon. And the other thing too is, we don't want to call out any specific individuals too hard.
No names, but maybe maybe just categories of people. Categories. Is it the top brass at the chains? I mean, what category of people have been?
They won't even talk to us.
They won't even talk to you. So they don't even get to be part of this rating scale.
Yeah, we're still working on trying to get them. We do this on every podcast. We go, if you are an executive at a chain or a PBM, the invitation is open. Please come talk to us. We want to hear your side. So we'll put that plug. I would say sometimes you're your own biggest pain in the ass.
Yep.
And that's how I'll phrase it. There's a lot of internal stuff to work through as you're going through a project. So yeah, don't be your own biggest enemy.
Now, Kristen, Anaïs bailed you out, and I know that you don't want to go too far down the road, but what's been a difficult situation for you here? And can we pick a certain class of the profession or non-profession that's been putting some roadblocks up?
I think pharmacy is a pain in the ass right now. Both perspectives, meaning it's a pain in the ass to a lot of people working in the industry, but it's also a pain in the ass to us because, more broadly speaking, even, I feel like pharmacy hasn't stepped up and been its own advocate. We're such great patient advocates, but we're not good self-advocates. We never have been. And I think that we're stuck in this position between a rock and a hard place where we feel like we're being abused and taken advantage of, and we're not doing much anything about it. And I think that, again, from the perspective of Anaïs there, who said sometimes we individually are in our own way, we're our own pain in the ass. I love pharmacy. I became a pharmacist because I believe in it. I think there are incredible individuals working in pharmacy, professionals who are not being utilized. They're underappreciated. But I think also it's partly because we have been some of the poorest self-advocates. And from that perspective, in trying to promote this film, get it out there and get people who are excited about it to support us and behind us, it's been a pain. It's been a big challenge because I think in general, pharmacy hasn't been self-advocating very well for a very long time. And we've been demoralized. I think there's a lot of shame in the profession right now. And it's an unfortunate thing. I also think it's going to be the impetus that pushes us all forward.
It's shameful. I mean, I own my pharmacy and I'm in proximity of our checkout area. And you hear our text saying to somebody like, okay, that's going to be 52 cents. And everybody kind of jokes about it. And sometimes those might be a copay on $100 sale, but rarely, quite often, that 52 cents is the whole kit and caboodle. It's the price you get paid for the drug and the time and everything. And that's rather embarrassing. I just kind of duck my head, at least figuratively, because who wants to admit that you're charging 52 cents? And who wants to admit that we're in a situation where we allow someone to put a 52 cent charge onto us? It's hard to stomach. There's anger, frustration, but it's embarrassing too.
It's true.
Sometimes in pharmacy, you feel like you don't have the support because everybody is just checking out.
Yeah.
Yet we do have a lot of followers and a lot of support on the other hand, including within pharmacy. So it's just been a challenge to corral and pull in and inspire, spin up all the support needed to really keep us going. We have it internally, but the more support we can get from the pharmacy profession and world, the better able we'll be able to produce this film and tell the story.
Kristin, where do you come across that attitude? Is it when you're asking somebody for financial support? Where are you getting that kind of pushback from pharmacists themselves?
I'd say a lot of it's just on social, which, social media can be a curse or a blessing depending on how you look at it. But, there's a lot of blame and shame going around. And, sometimes it's in the form of just trying to bat down the misperception that we are against pharmacy. We meaning the documentary. Even the name Harmacy seems to point a finger at the profession, when really it's about the impact on the staff and the patients that the Harmacy system has applied. So, there's some of that in trying to bat down or combat misconceptions about our goal and our mission and our perspective. And then just the general support. Again, we have a lot of support, but I feel like things could be a bit faster and a bit more proficient and effective if we had even more support from the pharmacy community.
Yeah.
Whether it be sharing, liking, telling others about this project, or even financially, which is always something that's needed. The comment is, oh, is it done? When's it going to be done? How soon will we see it filmed on the big screen or otherwise? And our response is, well, it's about as fast as the support behind us. So sometimes that's the challenge. A lot of people are discouraged. A lot of people are even unable to support because they're so freaking busy, working in the chain. They just don't have the ability. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily something that we're, accusing or blaming, but it is definitely a challenge that's out there. I'll leave it at that.
We know pharmacy so closely, so we can easily grasp when somebody says, all right, here's the players, the patients, the pharmacies, the owners, the PBMs. Pharmacists can sort of understand those. But I guess you're right. If you had something like, if you came out and said something like, the problem with bakeries or bike shops or something like that, it would take you a little bit of time to say, all right, with the bakery, you've got the store owners and the people that have the ovens and the flour buyers, and you'd start to get a little mixed up on who's what. And so all the more reason to have the documentary, but I can see where people sometimes have trouble kind of grasping it at first.
Yes, absolutely. Because we have to remember, especially when we're talking to other pharmacists who do understand the landscape a little more, that the general public is still being brought up to speed. A lot of people don't even know pharmacists after the year 2000 have doctorate degrees. People don't know that. I had talked to someone recently that I had connected with at a networking event, and she was taking notes, and she was like, I had no idea that all 50 states had different pharmacy laws. She's like, I've moved around a lot and I've had different challenges getting my prescription in different states, and I had no idea. So that's the part where we're like, it is an expose documentary, of course, but it's also educational, and we have to remember where the public is starting. And that's why we decided to also write a book alongside the film, because we know that you can only fit so much on the screen, but you can really slow down in a book and get into the nitty-gritty details. Like, you can't just tell a film audience this is a DIR fee, because they'll be like, I do not care. I don't understand. That's too far over my head. But if you ease them in and you're able to slow down in a print format in a book, they're like, oh, I get it.
I think the audience is hard sometimes because you don't know. Like with this show, I've made it a point to say, I never talk about something that I already know about just for the sake of somebody. Like, I don't have guests on here talking about, the benefits of retail pharmacy or stuff like that. It's like, I'd fall asleep on that. I always think I'm talking to you guys like we're driving in a car somewhere, and we know we're pharmacists, so we don't talk at all about pharmacy stuff. We kind of move beyond that. But I can see, like, with the audience, like, who's the target? What level are you starting with? The conversation to physicians and nurses and pharmacists is going to be different from Aunt Sally, who doesn't know about the pharmacy thing. So I imagine that is an area you have to focus to know who your audience is.
Definitely. And part of that is why it's been really great to partner with Scott and other folks from Hollywood and our co-director, Jose, because they are a stand-in for the general audience. And so a lot of what we're focusing on for producing the film is making it what's called evergreen. So it's about the characters. It's about the emotional connection you have with our main subjects. And you're like, oh, I'm rooting for that pharmacist. You want them to succeed. You're watching them through their trials and tribulations during the documentary. And you're like, I want that person to succeed. That's the emotional core we're going for. Because if you can make the person care who's watching, that's when you can make them pay attention to some of the more quote unquote boring or complex stuff, is when they really care about who you're talking about.
Even the title, when we're talking about meeting the audience where they're at, the title of the film being Harmacy. How many times have you drove by a pharmacy or any storefront where a letter's burnt out and you kind of say to yourself, oh, what does that spell? It's kind of funny. And when we drive by a pharmacy, sometimes that P is burnt out. And I think that is also relatable because people drive by the pharmacy all the time with a P burnt out or other letters burnt out. And so I think people, when they see, the title or the image of what we believe we may run with as far as branding or marketing on the film, that is relatable to a lot of people as well.
You've got to have the neon light with the P kind of blinking a little bit, and finally it peters out, and then the Harmacy. We can picture that without even seeing it, and that means that it's drawing a little bit of reality out of us, I guess.
Completely.
Absolutely.
I follow your email updates, and a few months ago, you were commenting on the cost of a good documentary, and these ones that you're seeing on the screen, or even on a good one on Netflix, something like that. These are running anywhere from, on the low end, $500,000, you were saying, and upwards from there. And I fact-checked that. I went online and I said, what is the cost of a good documentary? And it said $500,000 and up. It was just what you were saying. So it's a lot of money, but a lot of times things that are good are a lot of money. Did that amount ever shock you, or did you know that from the very beginning, or was that a reality you had to come to accept as this was moving forward?
I was definitely shocked when we first started. When we first came on the podcast, it was when we were getting our crowdfunding up and going, and it went really successfully. After we went on the podcast, we got $22,000 in 3 weeks and were able to take our first trip, and it was amazing. And I was like, wow, it's so great. But then when you start breaking down, you have to pay people. You have to rent equipment. You need lights. You need to get there. There's a lot of expense that goes into creating a good film. There's ways to minimize cost without sacrificing quality. For example, what you end up doing for like ourselves plus our co-director, Jose, points. So essentially on the back end is when you're getting most of our compensation. None of us have been paid of the producers. We are doing this because it's a labor of love, but we have put our compensation on the back end. So if the film is successful and there's revenue coming in, we have a revenue split. And so it's just people power. We have to pay for a good thing because you need people to do graphics. You need to do animation. Someone has to mix the sound. And so that's why it does cost usually upwards of 500,000 plus, and 500,000 is on the low end. So talking with Scott, our consulting producer, he said, usually a documentary like this would be closer to 700,000 to $1 million. And the fact that we are doing this for around 500,000 is amazing and a testament to your team.
It's really cool that we were able to attach the co-director and cinematographer that we were, because he is known in the industry for making micro-budget films like ours look like 10 times the value and the quality. And he is a real pro. We're really excited about this. So that's partly how we were able to keep the budget so low. There's other strategies that we employed, but I was more surprised to learn that $500,000 is considered a micro budget. Initially, when we started this, we thought it might be a couple million to make the film. So when we got the right people on board and really took a close look at what we're doing and how we wanted to do it and what's possible while keeping the quality high, I'm actually surprised to know that we are in micro budget film at around $500,000. But part of the reason there is keeping the costs low is that we as a team, as Anaïs said, are taking remuneration on the back end, including other key individuals like our co-director and anybody else we bring on to make this project.
I just want to weigh in about Jose really quick, just to talk about how exciting it is that we have folks like him attached. He actually was one of the camera operators for The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary. And so we're like, this is real talent. We are making an A-tier documentary.
When you talk about the split of profits on the back end, there we go again, Kristin. As pharmacists, we're like, no, we're going to spend $500,000 on this just to get a point across. It's like, yeah, okay, but this is real life. When people invest in things, if you've got someone putting in, 10 grand into this, and it's an investor who has more than just sour grapes of PBMs or something, they want that split at the end. For some people, this is a business decision. What kind of revenue are we talking about from a documentary like this? Would it be box office receipts? Would it be payment from some of these streaming services that buy it? Or is it the advertisers if this was on some show? What revenue stream is on the back end if you could imagine it being really big? What kind of big revenue can come from something like this? For me, it's kind of foreign.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk about this because I have been answering this question a lot, as has Kristin. With this, there's a few different possibilities of how we get that revenue. So number one is a sale from a large streamer. So you have your Netflixes, your Hulus, your Amazon Primes. If they go, oh my gosh, incredible project, then they write us a check, and however much more that is than our budget, that is what your ROI is. And then say we don't go with one of the larger streamers and we decide to do what's called AVOD, which is advertised supported video on demand platforms, which is Tubi, Roku, Freevee. They're free. They don't have a subscription model. And those are the ones that are taking off the most because a lot of people are making the decision to cancel things like Netflix in favor of these free platforms. And that's when we would get the ad revenue. In addition to those platforms, you can sell to things like airlines and cruise ships. So when you're on a plane and they're like, hey, check out this new movie, those projects have sold to the airlines. And then we would get the ad revenue. At the bottom, you usually see little ads. Part of that revenue would come to us. We are also thinking of doing a small physical media run. So one idea that Scott had was having a little thumb drive with the movie on it, and it's shaped like a pill. And we approach independent pharmacy owners and go, hey, do you want to sell this in your store? Do you want to sell this plus our book? And we sell it as a package. And then we would get revenue that way. So those are the different ways that we can get revenue. Plus, documentary viewing in this country has changed a lot. A lot of people are on TikTok fact-checking you or YouTube, or they're going down rabbit holes. And we're going to have a lot of extra footage on top of what we have in the film itself. So there's ways to monetize that using things like Patreon, because we're not hiding anything. We're like, hey, there's nothing for us to hide. This isn't a propaganda film. We're not slanting it. So if you want to watch our footage here, sign up for our Patreon for however many dollars a month, and then that's an extra revenue stream. So we're estimating about 2 to 5 times ROI on our budget. However, there have been documentaries that have sold for 10, 20x ROI. So there was a documentary called Boys State. Their budget was $1 million, and it sold for $12 million to Apple TV. So there are some of those Cinderella stories where you have a unicorn and it's a huge sale, but, who knows? We would love for that to be us.
And some of those are not exclusive. So in other words, you might have something that's, I don't know, wherever it would be for the most impact for 3 weeks or 3 months, and then Netflix or somebody could pick it up. It's not always just like they get it first.
Yeah. So when it comes to the exclusivity, usually if it goes onto a bigger streamer first, they will have exclusivity for a certain amount of time. However, certain ones of the AVOD platforms, they don't have exclusivity, so you can be on several at once. Plus, you can be on the rental platforms like Vudu, where someone can just rent the documentary for a few dollars and they don't have to pay for an ongoing service. So it just depends on some of the contracting language and which platforms you decide to go with first.
You mentioned independent pharmacies, or let's say community pharmacies of some sort that have a dog in the fight. And that's an interesting point you bring up there, because sometimes patients will come in and they'll complain about stuff, not about you, but to you about what's happening to them. How, this other store, they had to go there for this or that, a specialty drug, and they screwed them and all this kind of stuff. And it's hard sometimes to get your point across without making it sound like a sob story, like you're in the drama club, and then I'm hanging out with my sophomore daughter talking about her best friend yesterday, who is now her worst friend today, and her worst friend yesterday is her best friend today. But it would be kind of cool to point to something, whether it's a book or something, and say, look, don't take my word for it. This is what's going on.
Yes. No, we would love that. That would be a great conversation point. And a lot of the big retailers, they are retailers. So there are four-way displays and other types of displays in a Walmart, in a Target. So if we could talk to some store managers and be like, can you skip that four-way close to the pharmacy with our book? Maybe it'll help make your customers understand. And it's even easier with your independently owned pharmacies, because you just talk to owners and go, like you're saying, this will help the conversation. You know what? We understand we have a lot of those same issues going on. Why don't you check out this book? Give it a read, give this movie a watch, and that'll answer a lot of your questions. And it is an additional revenue stream because, as we're going to talk about in the documentary, negative reimbursement issues are real. Losing money filling prescriptions is real. So a lot of independent pharmacies are looking for those additional sources of revenue.
You mentioned some of the big box stores carrying this. Do any of them come out of this documentary unscathed, though? I imagine you're going to be mentioning some names. Is your documentary going to put them all in the same bucket? And then how happy would any of these stores be to see you, much less have this book in their store?
Kristen's smiling, so I'll let her take this.
And we're laughing because it's definitely a question and a concern, especially for those big box retailers, even PBMs. And I think the answer to that is we are trying to create a robust perspective on this film. Truly, sincerely, we are actively seeking perspectives from big chains and from PBMs to state their viewpoints. And if anybody is aware of the problems and the criticism and the complaints out there, it is these companies. They're very acutely aware of what they're being accused of and what they're being blamed for. And there are some events, private events, for example, that I've attended and that I expect others on our team will be attending, related to what these companies are doing. For example, Walmart, Walgreens, Rite Aid, Optum, Express Scripts, CVS, what they're doing to change the system, to change their practices, and if there's anything in the way of making those changes. We are, through our characters, exposing what's going on and where the failures are, but there's also a significant opportunity in this film for them to speak from their side. And this, in the film industry, is something that we call access. We're seeking robust access to be able to tell all sides of the story, because we believe it's through sharing those sides that we'll come to better solutions, more complete solutions, or more practical solutions to a lot of these problems. So that hopefully that answers your question.
It brings up an interesting point. Let me write this down a second. Ladies, when you get to be my age, you get a thought, and you can't have two thoughts at once. The first one pushes the next one out.
I'm already there.
Let me see. What was I going to talk about? Okay, so let me make 2 points here. That's interesting about getting people that maybe are the target of something like this to talk. And I wonder what not the psychology, but I wonder what if you could punch this into AI kind of thing and say, is this good to have those being picked out a little bit on there to state their piece? Is it bad? What if they go on, but they've got a bad spokesperson? How does that make them look? I wonder in general, what is your thought on that? I don't mean for this project, but I mean in general. Let's say on, who are those? Michael, I forget his name, but I'm just going to say on Michael Moore, but on a documentary, do you think it's always beneficial for the enemy or, the person that
Protagonist.
Is a protagonist a good guy or a bad guy?
Right.
And antagonist.
Yes. Antagonist, yeah.
Is it always good for the antagonist in one of these things to come on? If you were the antagonist, if you were the group, and don't fluff it up to say, yes, it's good for them to come on. Do you think it's good for them to come on?
I have 2 thoughts on this because I've thought a lot about this. One is they are going to be in it either way. So they're either going to be a title card that says, we reached out to all of these folks and no one talked to us. And then everyone fills in the blanks however they will. Or they come on and say their piece, and then they at least get to say their piece. And so that's one side of it where it's like, you'll be in there one way or another. And then the other side of that coin is it makes for a more interesting documentary as far as a viewership. Because if you look at something like Lou the Rich, which is about LuLaRoe, the company, they interviewed the founders, and that documentary did not paint that company in a very good light. But the founders sat down with them for 7 hours. I listened to some of the behind the scenes stuff, and they had a really lengthy interview for that docuseries. And I think it's to the point I just made. You might as well get your point across because you're going to end up in the documentary either way. But then another angle is the marketing side. And so you want to position yourself as one of the companies who we might be talking about as we are doing things. You want to save face because you want to say, no, we're not the antagonist. We're part of the system. We're also trapped in the system. And that's what we're trying to discover. We just have hypotheses right now because we haven't finished making the documentary. And I think that's a really important point to make. A lot of people are like, oh, you already know it's this, that, or the other. And it's like, we actually don't because we're not done. So we just think it's one thing right now, but we don't know because we haven't finished shooting. And so let us shock test that hypothesis by getting all of the different viewpoints.
Yeah. And I think also too, when you add, we really want to maintain credibility. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of blaming. And we want to maintain credibility. And I think when we include the antagonists, we boost our credibility. We want to be able to portray all sides of the story. And to Anaïs's point, it's really through putting these cards, all the cards on the table, that we could potentially find a solution to these problems that we knew nothing about. My perspective, when I came from the PBM industry, I did see things on the inside that, in my mind, seemed like improvements, like active efforts towards improving patient care and management of benefits, despite what a lot of people on the outside see. And so I guess in a selfish way, but also applying this to more broadly to patient care, I want to know whether solutions do exist. And the only way that we can get at those is to really lay all the cards on the table and find out what, if anything, is prohibiting these big chains from doing better, for making a better, more positive impact on the lives of patients and their pharmacy staff. And then also at the end of the day, we hold creative authority. So if they say something that doesn't align well with the story arc or doesn't contribute value or whatnot, we ultimately hold creative authority on the film.
It's interesting, Kristen, you bring that up because I like to watch a good expose. I mean, if I'm watching this, I'd rather have the no PBMs come on and I want to shove the microphone in their face and then talk about how they're all driving their Rolls Royces into our pharmacy lot to do a audit or something like this. But for the sake of the profession, I don't know if that's best because you can do an expose and it seems that it has a short up and down, quick way. But really for the betterment of the profession, like you say, you don't know the end of this. You don't know where it's going to go, but it seems there's some value also in getting all sides, letting people think, knowing that this is a problem, and how does everybody raise up to fix this instead of just embarrassment and expose and things like that. It's a real interesting way of which way it could go. And part of it is up to the antagonist if they're going to be on the show or not. Well, and even at this point, maybe the pharmacists are the antagonists and everybody else is a good person. You don't know that yet. Wink. No. You don't know that yet.
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of shades of gray. Essentially, back in the day, you used to have a lot more like mustache twirling villains, like, the villain. But then as film and television have evolved, it's way more about the anti-hero now because that person is much more complex and it's fascinating for people to watch. And so I think we have much more of an anti-hero situation than we do a villain.
Define the anti-hero. That's interesting. Somebody who you think is a villain and they end up being a hero or vice versa?
No, not even that necessarily. So I don't know if you've seen the show Succession. Have you seen that show at all or heard about it?
Yeah, with the billionaires for a while and the dad fell out of a helicopter and died or something like that at the soccer match. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. He had a stroke. That whole
close
family.
enough.
No,
Yes.
close enough. But anyway, so that whole family, they would be a good example of an anti-hero because you're like, they're at some level, they're the hero of their own story, but they're not great people. There's a lot of complexity. You can understand why they make the decisions that they make as you watch the show. You're like, oh, yikes. Why did Kendall do that? That is ridiculous, but I understand where he's coming from, even though it's bad. I don't like the choice, but I understand it.
And that's the balance we have to strike on this film. We want to be entertaining. It has to cater to the audience, but also we want to educate and expose, but we don't want to do it at the cost of maybe finding potential solutions to the problem.
You don't always get the big boys talking, and if somebody does for this, that's a chance to at least pry into their mind a little bit for what it's worth. One thought I had was, one of the things I've done is at the pharmacy, and this is just about my thought about putting the microphone in people's faces. It seems like when I was younger in the pharmacy, about every 2 or 3 years, you'd get a new reporter who came in the area and they wanted to do a story on drug pricing. Every few years, they'd be out in the streets and having their microphones in people's faces and asking why this price is so much here, but across the street, it's half that price. One thing I've always done, and not so much anymore, calls on us. I have this show and I'm lazy. But one thing I did was always trying to be a good resource for these 3 or 4 stations in town. And so then it was kind of like when these things came around, maybe my name wasn't included in the people that they're going to go talk to because maybe a co-reporter next to them that says, leave Mike alone. He scratches our back once in a while and let's not bite his hand kind of thing. It doesn't hurt to have those relationships with the news.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely are starting to break into the general news media. At first, they were like, oh, this is not interesting or big enough, or we don't know what happened. They weren't really interested in our project at first, but as we've grown and gotten bigger, it was USA Today, Emily LaCause, I believe she did a story and she was interviewing folks. She was like, several people mentioned your documentary. Several people I was interviewing said, oh, you should talk to the documentary folks. Oh, you should talk to the would you like shots with that people. And so I reached out to her because I was like, oh, she did this story and she seems like she did a really thorough reporting job. And when I reached out, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy you reached out. A lot of people mentioned your documentary. So we are starting to get on that side of having some reporters who are kind of on our team and willing to hear our side of the story and what our project is doing.
What you typically see in pharmacies is the payments going down, but the service is not going down all the time. You've got an independent pharmacist, let's say, that in the past made a decent salary, decent profit, goes down. Pretty soon they're even losing money, about ready to close, in 3 months. But their service really hasn't stopped because of who they are as a person. They care for Mrs. Smith. They're still doing the delivery. They're still smiling. They're still doing a good service for the community. And then all of a sudden, it's going to drop off the cliff. No one's going to see it coming with worse service. It's just going to drop off the cliff, and there's going to be pharmacy deserts and things like that. I don't think the consumer doesn't really understand what they're gradually missing until the store's closed, until they went off the cliff. And they're like, what the hell happened?
Yes, I have two stories that just illustrate this point. One is from when we went out to New York, and one of the people that we filmed was Neil Smaller.
Neil, yep.
At his pharmacy.
I've had Neil on the show a couple times.
Yeah, we filmed Neil, and as we're interviewing him, he was telling us about when he had to close one of his locations.
Wait a minute. You're telling me Neil shared with you what was on his mind?
Right? What? I can't even believe it.
I can't believe that.
I can't believe that. But he was like, so I had to close a location, and the last day was like a funeral. Everyone was crying. It was so sad. People were like, Neil, how can we help you? Can we come to your other location? And he said, no, don't come to my other store, because you will put me out of business faster. He said, take your prescriptions over to CVS and then come buy my supplements. And the general public doesn't know that or understand it. He also said, I'm not running a business anymore. If I was losing money on my chicken sandwiches, I wouldn't be in business. And it's going to be a very powerful interview when we are able to share that in the documentary, a lot of the things that he said, because no, they didn't see it. They just saw great customer service from Neil and his team. And then suddenly the store was closed.
And it's gone.
Story number 2 is actually from the other week. So I had a pharmacy owner. This person, I won't share their name because you'll see why in a second. But basically, we're currently seeking investors for our project. And so we've both been reaching out to various people in our networks. And I reached out to this pharmacy owner, and he was really excited to invest. He's like, yeah, I'm ready. I just have to talk to my business partner, see how much we can come in for. And then I followed up with this person, and he sends me an email. He's like, thank you for your email. We would have been able to invest, and we were really excited, and we still support your project. However, we are in a fight with one of the big PBMs. They are holding $800,000 of our money for no reason. So we don't have any money for you. And yeah, I was just like, this is so meta. This is the project. It's like, we can't get funding that quickly. We are getting funding. We're doing fine. But like, we have these stumbling blocks because we reach out to these independent pharmacy owners who are like, I have the money in hand. I'm ready to go. And then suddenly it's pulled out from under them. Oh, sorry, $800,000 worth of payments withheld.
Same thing with the DIR fees coming. They're doubling down, right?
For our listeners, is these PBMs come in and take a lot of money off the back end like 3 months later. You don't even know what the hell it's for. They just take money out of your bank account pretty much. And now the law has changed, so they get to take money out of your bank account right away. And also 3 months later. It's terrible stuff. So, Anaïs, you mentioned your finances are right on target. And we as pharmacists, sometimes we're so negative, and I try to add to that negativity with this show. I don't try to, it just happens. But we see the negativity and we see the request for more investment and things like that. And we're always approaching stuff negatively and saying, well, is this going the same route as the independent pharmacies are down the hill? But you mentioned that you're right on target for finances and things. Share that with us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share that because it's going so well. One of the reasons we partnered with Scott is because he runs a podcast called Finance Your Movie, and he basically is a financial consultant for independent films. And he has this system where you use your personal network, so friends, family, people in your profession, and you reach out. It's very personal connections, and that's how you get your people and you find your financing. And so he helped us put together a business plan, and you share some of that in your network. And with that, we have been inviting people in our circle to help with the financial piece. And Scott said, trust the process, because it's a numbers game. You have to reach out to a lot of folks, and we've gotten a lot of people who are like, I'm very excited to be able to contribute to the film, but I literally don't have money. But seeing the well-crafted business plan and our pivot and the things we're doing with Harmacy, everything that we're doing, people are getting really excited. Even people who donated before in the crowdfund, or maybe they didn't want to invest previously, because we've asked some of these people to invest before and they're like, oh, not at this time. But they've come around because they're like, wow, you have a really solid plan. And so Scott said with his process, it takes about 2 to 6 months. And it's been about 6 weeks. By the time this podcast comes out, we will probably have broken escrow, which is $300,000, which is when we'll start filming again. A lot of people are starting to respond and go, you know what? I would like to come in for that $9,000. You know what? I do want to come in for X amount of dollars. And Scott said, a lot of people ask, oh, what if everyone comes in for the minimum? Like, no one's going to come in for like the higher dollar amounts. And he's like, everyone thinks that. But once you get a few people who come in for the 1 shares, 2 shares, that's when you're going to get your big dollars. People coming in for the co-producer dollar amount or the executive producer dollar amounts, because they just want to see some people are committed. But once they do, then you get to make a lot of exciting phone calls, because it's all about calling up people in your network and being like, hey, I got something cool going on. And then once a few investors come on board, you get to make the excited phone calls. Hey, get in quick before the opportunity is gone. And we're about to hit that stage.
Yeah, just the analogy that there's a lot of water sitting and about to break the dam. So lots of people ready to put money in, really considering it, excited, and just waiting for someone else to jump in. And sometimes they're not even just waiting. I think they're just, they're busy. And then when they hear that the dam is broken and a few individuals have jumped in for significant support, they know there's limited bandwidth left to contribute, and they jump.
Anaïs, I remember when you and Kim were on the show originally, you talked about a story. You had told me this isn't just damn this group and lift this group up and how one-sided it is. What is the story aspect of this in terms of, I don't know, Kristin, you're the one that brought up the fancy term of antagonist and protagonist, but isn't there kind of like the entry of the story and then the climax and the follow-up? What is that with this story? I take it that process hasn't stopped. You still have a story in this production.
Yes. So it is always story first when it comes to creating something like a documentary or anything to be entertaining to a general audience, or any audience for that matter. Something that happens at the end of a story, kind of like the third, like 75% in, is what's called the all is lost moment, where you're just like, ooh, this is rough. Everything's going so bad. All is lost. Dark night of the soul is another thing it's called, and where you're like, you really feel for your subjects and your characters, because you're like, they have so much they're up against. I don't feel like there's any hope. And that's around 75%. And you don't end your movie there, because that's not the emotion we want to leave people with. We want to take them there. they have to go to that dark place. But then from there, you kind of come out of that in the structure that we're going for. We want to show folks in the general audience that pharmacy is worth fighting for as a profession. There are wonderful services that pharmacists currently provide and could be providing to more people if some of the issues that we talked about earlier in the documentary are solved and reformed. We have some solutions that our subjects will present. These are different things that different people think could solve these issues. We want the documentary to be a jumping off point towards solutions. We're not providing all the solutions because we don't have them, but we want it to be uplifting in the sense of channel the anger that you feel as a general audience member. Like, why can't that person win? Why can't this industry win? Channel that towards a positive action because it's worth fighting for, because a lot of people watching this, for example, have no idea what pharmacogenomics is. They don't know what deprescribing is. They don't know what MTM is, or even other services that they know about. But for the services that they don't know about, they're like, why don't I get precision medicine? I would love some of that precision medicine. And it's because it's not appropriately reimbursed. So maybe that person can take up the fight by writing their legislator to get some payment reform done. Because they're like, wow, if my family member had this precision medicine, maybe they wouldn't have had this side effect. So that's the kind of thing we want our audience to leave with, that pharmacists, as they currently are, as a profession, could be providing this excellent care for patients if a lot of these issues had been resolved. But the other point we want to drive home is, but they are not. This is an ongoing thing. And so this is why we want you to take up the fight with us.
As I hear you saying that, Anaïs, I got kind of that feeling of the Hamilton story where Mrs. Hamilton, what was her name? Hamilton's wife?
That's a great question. I don't remember.
I always call her Mrs. Hamilton. But she lived for another 50 years. She picked up on that story and then brought it forward once the story was in place. And that's the important part of where we came from and where we're going.
It is.
Boy, ladies, thanks for joining us. That was a great update. Besides the story of what's going to be on the documentary, the story behind the story of how this is coming together is really fascinating. It's something that we don't get to think about all the time in our little parts of the world. So it's cool to get in behind the scenes of this. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us and letting us do an update.
Yeah, continued best wishes. Where are our listeners going to go to learn more about this?
Listeners can go to harmacyfilm.com is one place that you can find us. Also, if you still have the old link, shotswiththat.com will redirect to our new website. We'll also be updating our social media handles from the current Shots With That to Harmacy Film, and that'll be on the various social media platforms.
All right, ladies, thank you very much for your time, and we're all looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.